If I think about the entire world, I think the birth rates are the biggest global problem because of the implications and also because a lot of people think the problem is the actual opposite. So every single developed country in the world, with the exception of Israel, has a below replacement fertility rate now. Every single one. Places like South Korea are below 1. So if you think the replacement rate is 2.1 births per woman, South Korea, I believe, is now down to about 0.7, 0.8. So if things don't turn around there in that country, they're scheduled for over a 90% population decline over a few generations, which should absolutely terrify people. You don't need to be Korean to just think, whoa, a 90% population decline. Meanwhile, you have people running around thinking that the world is overpopulated and the problem is that there's too many people and people need to stop having children because of the environment. The only reason why the numbers are sustaining and even growing in developed countries is A, because of immigration. So countries like our nations, the USA, the UK, France, Germany, whatever it is, they're just importing so many people from other nations that they're sort of artificially propping up their numbers. And then secondly, of course, increased life expectancy. So people are living longer than they used to. And as a result, you can have a massive tanking, a massive dip in the birth rate. And it seems like everything is fine because the sort of total population number is staying steady or it's rising slowly. But once those older people start to die out, then if subsequent generations are quite literally just not replacing ourselves, then there's not really going to be much of a future for humanity. So I say that's the biggest issue because we're kind of collectively failing at the most basic thing that animals are supposed to do, which is reproduce and keep our numbers sustained. So beyond all the other sort of complicated issues, I think that's just like the most basic survival one.
I love that. And I love that you said that. You're not going to hear it very often. But it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that you say that. You're always a maverick in that regard. But again, it's something that people like you hear about here and there, but it doesn't get enough airtime. What do you think about something we talked about 2 years ago? Again, I remember sitting in a circle of just like this Malthusian plan, really like you mentioned climate change, this overarching global problem. They admitted themselves, decades ago, we need something so big that it galvanizes the world together for our agenda. Do you think that's just part of the plan? I mean, it seems like it is to me, but what is your take on this Malthusian kind of globalist plan to seemingly, whether it's Bill Gates and saying, hey, we need this, 20 years ago to the CIA, we have video of him saying these things of, hey, how we're going to decrease population and do all these things. Is this just, is it a couple guys at the top pulling the strings, or is it just this collective malaise and apathy of the people and centralized organizations? Like, how do you see this?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is that it's not a new problem. We can Google this, but wasn't Thomas Malthus in the 1700s?
Yes. Yeah. I believe he was.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yep.
the term that we're even using, Malthusian, this is a term that's centuries old. So since the 1700s, there have been people who clearly have been saying, hey, there's too many people on Earth and we're going to run into this overpopulation problem. And then I think it got another sort of big push in the 1970s. A lot of things went weird in the 1970s. I think that's really when it got a big push across the West. I'm not an expert on that. So I understand why someone would believe that the world is overpopulated. Because if you live in certain cities, it looks that way. If you live in Mumbai, or you live in New York, or you live in London, or you live in LA, or you live in Paris. I mean, I've been to some of these cities and I can see how if you live there and you see the traffic and you see the absence of housing and you're just seeing people just all over the place, then it's easy to think, hey, the world is overpopulated because we all have a sort of locality bias around the things that we're used to, both whether that's our neighborhood or it's our city or it's our nation as a whole. If you look at the USA, I mean, the whole world's population can very happily fit in Texas, like rather comfortably. So, some people will say, well, it's not about the space, it's about the resources, right? That's the sort of standard thing people go to. And again, people have been saying this for many hundreds of years because, as you were saying, people struggle with exponential, and people tend to assume that certain things are a lot more static or linear than they are. So I don't know, maybe you know the answer to this, Brandon. What was the human population of Earth at the turn of the previous century? So the year 1900. Am I right in saying it was under 2 billion, I think?
Yeah, I was going to say it's only a couple of billion, I believe. Yes, correct.
Yeah, I think maybe it was around 2 billion. And so now we're obviously at 8 billion. So, I mean, in 100, let's say 120 or so years, that is a massive multiplication. And people in 1900, with the technology that they had and the agriculture that they had and the resources and the logistics and all of that, at that time, they would not have probably been able to handle 8 billion people in the world. But no one considers technology. People don't consider the fact that we make advancements and that human beings are phenomenal problem solvers. So it can always seem in any moment that, oh my gosh, like we can't, you know, we're not going to be able to solve this particular issue. And people generally are not thinking, hey, let's have some faith and trust in humanity. Let's have some faith in innovation. You know, there's fertilizers, for example, that they use now, which allow people to grow so like infinitely more food than people were able to grow not so long ago. If you look at advancements in medical technology, for example, this is why people are living longer. My dad's a doctor. My dad's been a doctor for over 50 years. And he says, you know, this is a sort of unpolitically correct point. But one of the issues, if you want to call it that, that you're actually having in a country like the UK, where you do have socialized medicine with the NHS, is simply that you've got an increasingly aging population. And now you have people who they're living, but they're alive with like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different ailments. A few decades ago, that person would have passed away. And now you have increasing numbers of people who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and they're still alive. And thank God people are alive, right? I wish everybody a long life. But it's sort of created this sort of strange issue, which again is not talked about at all because it's not politically correct. But it's like, wow, we have this increasing number of people and people are living for so long. And we have the socialized healthcare system, so it's taxpayer funded. And it's getting very sort of top heavy because it's like, man, how do we continue to afford all this unless you're just going to, you know, keep increasing taxes? And so we have this sort of strange problem. The whole issue itself, I guess, isn't totally new, but we're sort of in a unique place where on one hand, I'm saying, yeah, there aren't enough births. And then on the other hand, it's like people are living for so long, which is wonderful, but that is now putting massive pressure on any nation that has socialized medicine. As far as I know, I think this is a big problem in China as well, even more so there because they have a huge population, 1.3 billion, and they also had their super anti-human and barbaric one-child policy for such a long period of time. So they've got this like very top-heavy population pyramid where there just aren't a lot of young people and there's a lot of old people. And Chinese people also have one of the longest lifespans in the world. God bless them. Then you have, if I look at where my family is originally from, I'm a Nigerian by background. Do you know the median age in Nigeria?
Is it in their 30s? I can't
20.
remember. 20. Wow.
20.
Jeez.
So half the population in Nigeria is under the age of 20. I think in the UK that number is mid 40s. I want to say it's something like 43. In the US, I think it's somewhere around 40. I think in places like Germany, it's closer to 50, somewhere like 47, 48, something like that. Yeah, I mean, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Nigeria, the birth rate is 5. In America, I think it's 1.6. I think UK is about 1.4 now. And so if you want to kind of see what's going to happen in the future as far as demographics and the population go, it's not too hard to work out. I mean, you can just look at the numbers and you can extrapolate and you can see, oh, wow, okay, Nigeria is on track to become the third most populous country in the world. It's going to overtake the USA. Right now, the USA is the third after India and China, and it's going to get overtaken by Nigeria. And then you could project down 50 years, 100 years, and you could probably just see, okay, what's the population of Earth going to look like? Doesn't look like there's going to be that many Japanese people or that many South Korean people, which, you know, unless they can do something, unless they start to take this like really seriously. And I don't, it's a complicated problem too, man, because how do you even, assuming you want to solve it, I mean, what do you even do that is moral and ethical and righteous to reverse course on some of these things? But I think the very first step is awareness. And I think at least now people are starting to talk about it. I mean, even just 5 to 10 years ago, even suggesting that underpopulation could become an issue, people would totally look at you sideways. Whereas I think some people still look at you sideways if you say that. But I think more and more people are starting to look at the data and be like, oh, wow, actually, this doesn't bode well for the future. So I think the first thing is getting it on people's radar.
What part of the world has you most excited in those terms? I mean, it seems like Nigeria might be, I always think of Central and South America and Africa really being some of the greatest stories, I think, of the next century here. What do you think, just in terms of all your travel and things you've seen?
If you want the answer to that question right there and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.